All right, so this is module 15, and we're going to talk about what can be planted now. We're going to go into a little bit around successional planting. We talked about it earlier in some of the modules, but we'll go into that a little bit more, and what we still have the potential to get a harvest from this season. And so again, we're in early July. July 2nd is our time, and we have quite a bit yet of our growing season. Again, we have a 155-day frost-free growing season this year, and there's windows on either side of that growing season that will allow cooler season crops to continue. Some of our crops do well with a little bit of frost. You know, our kale, our Brussels sprouts, a lot of our brassicas do well with just a little bit of frost. And so that's a scenario where we can have that continue past our first frost and enjoy the benefits of a little frost. We just talked about protection. And so in the latter part of the growing season, if we have some of those more tender crops that we are growing, we can also use row cover. Something a little denser than the heavier weight than the row cover we were just using as an example for a little bit of shade or insect protection. You can get a row cover that's about 3/4 inch, 1 ounce, 1.5 ounce row cover. Each one of those upgrades in the weight of that material gives you an extra zone of protection, about 7 degrees. And so do consider extending your growing season past that first frost. There's completely an option to do that. We'll talk about that later as we get closer to that part of the season, but for right now, we're focused on what we can still plant. What can we continue our harvest with for this growing season? The idea is to have a resilient home garden, that we're growing food that is medicine. This is our greatest wellness tool, and so we want to have this continue into the fall and winter, and we want to have enough to be able to put away and preserve for the winter season. And so one of the things that we can think about right now is our space. Do we have enough room to add something to our garden beds? Or are we going to need to harvest or remove some plants to put another plant in its place that might be more productive and provide some additional food for the growing season? We have those bok choy that I'm letting go to flower and then to seed. If that was the issue, if we had a space issue, we could take those out and put something in its place. We would want to be mindful to put something in its place that would not take up more space than that particular plant is doing right now. And so that could be herbs. We could put some basil in those locations. And we can still direct seed basil right now and get basil to harvest by the end of the season. But we could put transplants of basil in that location as well. We could put some eggplants in that location. They get bigger than those bok choy, but thinking in that way, how much space do we have, and do we need to make more space or break more ground to get more food into our kitchens into the fall and winter? So let's talk about what seeds could potentially be planted yet still. And so like I said, we have that 155-day growing season. Our summer solstice has just happened, June 21st. And so that was our longest day of the year. We now are starting to get just gradually shorter and shorter days. And so when we're thinking about what could still be planted, we need to keep that in mind, that our daylight hours are gradually going down. And so when we're thinking about what could still be planted, we're going to need to add about a week or 2 weeks, the longer we get into the season, and wait for the maturity date on the seed packet. Most of your seed packets are going to have days to harvest or days to maturity or days from transplant to harvest, depending on the type of vegetable it is. So this is cucumber, and it's a pickling cucumber. Pickling cucumbers are traditionally harvested rather small because you want them to have a thin skin. You want them to be really dense, not very seedy. And so you're not harvesting them at full maturity. That's not, if you wanted to save the seed for a pickling cucumber, you would let that cucumber mature on the vine until it had grown well past the point of eating it, turned yellow, and fell off. And then you can harvest that seed. But if you're doing pickling cucumbers that you're actually going to pickle, the days to harvest is 56 days for this variety. And so absolutely we have time for that. We have 90 days left in our frost-free growing season. So we have plenty of time for more cucumbers. And that's something that you can successional plant. If you haven't planted your cucumbers yet this year, by all means plant some cucumbers. Make sure you've got your trellis. But if you are already harvesting cucumbers and you're starting to notice that your cucumber plants are looking a little deficient or looking maybe not so happy, you could go ahead and put their replacements in right now. Okra. To harvest, you know, this is going to be from transplant, 50 to 60 days. And so you can think, okay, I would have normally put a transplant in the ground at about 6 weeks old. And so, you know, we need to add that onto these days. And we could still get a harvest of okra right now. We're pushing the limits on that, but we could still get a harvest of okra. This is a cutie pie little melon. So small melons, you're going to have some time left for those guys, but not much. You want to get those in the ground right away. This doesn't have the dates to maturity. Oh, this one does. 75 days. So we add a week to that. These are direct seed. So we add a week to that and we've got, you know, 82 days. We have just enough time to get this little melon to harvest. We're going to be pushing it. Melons, things that are really frost tender, you know, it's a little bit of a gamble whether or not you're going to be able to get a harvest from a melon right now, but it's certainly something that you could try if you're doing something that is a little more frost tolerant and still working with a fruit. You might, like tomatoes can be a little more frost tolerant. I'm not saying plant tomatoes right now. If you're going to plant any tomatoes right now, they need to be really substantial sized transplants. But, you know, just thinking about the plants that could potentially handle just a little bit of a cooler night, you know, down to that 28 degrees and still survive that. Depends on how healthy your plants are. Some of them can. There are some lettuce varieties that do quite well in the heat. And so you can look for seed that does well in the heat in the way of lettuce, and you'll find that you can get some harvest from that. Some of your longer season brassicas, like your broccoli, your cauliflower, you could actually start some of those seeds right now indoors in a cooler scenario. Keep it down below 78 degrees, and between that 68, 70 degrees, you could start those seedlings indoors. And in 4 weeks, you can transplant those out right at the beginning of August, and you've got your fall crop started. Same with cabbages. You can do that right now. You can get those started indoors, protect them with a little bit cooler temperatures at that early stage, and then once they're 4 weeks old, you know, have 4 true leaves, go ahead and transplant them out into the garden. You can put a little bit of a row cover over them to keep them a little shaded, and then you've got an awesome fall crop that is going to produce quite well for you, and might even do quite well with the little bit of cooler temperatures. You know, even if they go into the frost, that's fine. Dill cilantro, like we said earlier, those can be successional planted throughout the season. And so every 2 weeks, if you love cilantro, if you love dill, if you're making lots of pickles and you're planting lots of pickling cucumbers, then you're going to need dill all through the season. Dill will you know, want to go to seed. It'll bolt, and same with cilantro. It'll want to go to seed, so the plant will start to senesce, and it'll start to want to mature its seed, and you might as well just let it do it once it really commits to that, because you're not going to get much in the way of leaf material, herb material to harvest from it. So every 2 weeks, plant a new row of cilantro or dill, and you can have it all through this season. Do be mindful when you're direct seeding small seeds, something that is as small as a dill seed or even a cilantro seed, you're going to need to pull the mulch away and do that in a bare furrow, and allow sunlight to get to the soil. It doesn't have to be completely bare. You can use some of that chopped mulch, just lightly cover it, have dapple light coming in so that you can, so that those seeds will be able to germinate. When you do plant them, if we're in the heat of July and you're doing that successional planting, this is intuitive there. You do want to plant them a little deeper though, because it's a little cooler, a little bit deeper. And so instead of a 1/4 inch, plant them 1 inch into the soil. But when they come out, when they germinate and break through the soil, they need to be able to access that light right away so they can start building, solar panels and getting some energy going in their bodies. Carrots and beets, you can do that right now as well, but they do like those cooler temperatures to germinate, but they prefer to be planted directly in the soil. And so use that board, like we have the board in the center of this bed for, keeping our weight off of the bed when we're standing in the bed to do our harvesting and care. You can do that under a board, like a 1x6. You can clear your strip where you're going to actually, your row where you're going to plant your carrots or your beets or your rutabagas or turnips or whatever you're going to plant. Don't plant radishes right now. Wait till it's much cooler. But those longer lived root crops that need longer, a longer season to reach maturity to harvest, then you can seed them. Don't bury them too deep, maybe, a 1/4 to 1/2 inch with the carrots. Deeper for the beets. Those two you don't necessarily plant together, but you could plant with your carrots a little bit of cilantro, and that would be a good marker indicator for your carrot row if you needed that. Usually it's done with radishes, but radishes would just get woody and hot. If you planted them right now, it's going to be too hot for them. Anyway, you go ahead and get them planted, cover them lightly with the soil, and then place the board right over the top, and that will retain moisture and allow them to germinate a little bit faster. When you are sowing directly right now in the beginning of July, we're just getting into the heat of summer, you're going to need to water that every day. You want to keep that soil nice and moist so that those seeds can imbibe with water and germinate quickly. Seeds, whether they're weed seeds or vegetable seeds, are good food for decomposer organisms and worms and all that. You don't want them to get eaten before they germinate. So make sure they stay moist. If they dry out, that could kill the little seedling before it actually breaks the soil. Again, basil is something you could direct sow right now, but you might be better off to go ahead and do that with a transplant if you've got those. You could go ahead and direct sow those, or make your transplants for later planting out. I find that basil is just a little hard to direct sow and get them to germinate. You might have better luck with that. But you can certainly grow new basil plants from seed right now and get a substantial harvest of basil so that you have it to match up with your tomatoes when your tomatoes are ready. That's usually a huge conundrum. So you've got all of these tomatoes, you've got a freezer full of tomatoes that you've been collecting through the growing season, and now it's late September, late August, late September, and you're ready to start making pasta sauce or pizza sauce. Do you have your basil? Your basil plants finished at the end of July because they were planted back at the end of May. Well, just keep planting them, successional plant. Plants like, or vegetables like zucchini, your crookneck squash, bush beans, all can still be planted right now, and you can have a substantial harvest before the end of the season. Don't think that you're done planting. By all means, if you are done planting, be done planting. But if you really want to keep the garden season going and really have more production coming out of your garden, there's so much more that you can plant. And connect with me, those that are a part of the Fairfield Garden Initiative program. I've got seeds for you, organic heirloom seeds. And also flowers. Don't forget your pollinators. Don't forget the beauty that makes your heart sing. And so sunflowers, you can be planting some of those still right now. You can get some beautiful heads produced before the end of the season. You can do zinnias. There are a lot of different things that you can still incorporate into your garden. Don't worry about whether or not it's going to be successful. If you're not super space limited and this is still experimental to you, experiment. Give it a try. Learn something new. See what your garden can do. See what you can do. And let's all just try to keep an abundant garden going, keep our engagement with nature in our manufactured little community here, and keep engaged with your food. Thanks.